Allora, colleghi, riprendiamo i nostri lavori. Comunico che è in distribuzione il nuovo testo.
Thank you very much for having come here on time. And we would like to point out that we have circulated a draft text of the conclusions, taking into account the proposed amendments tabled by the delegations. And I very much hope that this means that we will be able to agree on this draft. And now we would like to open the second session of our meeting, which will focus on prospects of European defence, strengthening the cooperative approach with strategic partners. And it is a very special honour and privilege for me to introduce this working session, which focuses on the topic of European defence, which was also discussed in the course of the morning session, and as we know is extremely important to us all.
La necessità con il consenso di
The Council last December indicated that all of the member countries undertake to ensure greater effectiveness, flexibility and visibility of Europe's common security and defence policy.
On the basis of the work that we've carried out, we shouldn't neglect the wonderful opportunity that we have at the European Council in June of 2015. That might give us a chance to work concretely and to clearly define the benefits that can be perceived in terms of defence and security matters. And in fact, Italy is trying to gain a broad consensus in establishing a fruitful cooperation mechanism in the defence sector. And the goal is to try to make sure that there is a convergence of our needs and military requirements and to synchronize the individual defence planning needs. So from a political standpoint, we have to focus the action of the EU on strategic goals. And in order to define those, we need to come to a full agreement which bears in mind the position of all the member states and the non-member states. The international arena is characterized by very quick changes and unpredictable situations and crises, and therefore there is great instability along EU borders. And this, of course, has a spillover in terms of our domestic security. We've got to work together in order to devise shared solutions, because we have to deal with the same issues and the same threats, and this is precisely why Europe has to take a more active role. We know that there is a lack of resources, and we also know that our partners and competitors have more resources than we do, and this is why we need shared policies. I think we should also say here that in the defense and security areas, we can no longer accept spending cuts. And we need to be convinced that at present we cannot have a division between military spending in opposition with civil spending, civilian spending, because investments are dual-purpose investments. Spending made in research for defense purposes has shown quite clearly that the spending and investments will have positive spillovers in the civilian sector as well. From an institutional standpoint, in terms of the building up of a European defense policy, we need to start from an assumption, and that is that many European policies do have an impact on defense matters. The member states and the national parliaments of the Union must be able to understand the opportunities that are being offered. We need accurate information, because this way all the actors can understand what the benefits are, and they can contribute in a concrete manner to the solutions. We need therefore, to have as much information as we can in this sector. And to do that, we have to strengthen the role and the functions and the powers of national parliaments and of the European Parliament as well. And I'm thinking here of the need to quickly integrate the European defence market, because this way we can strengthen European defence and we can ensure supplies. The success of the common European policy depends on the ability to acquire military resources, and we need cooperation, effective cooperation, in order to develop new capabilities and to pool and share national resources. The goal is to fill the existing gaps. So one goal is to improve the Union's rapid reaction capabilities, and this would include the use of battle groups. In any case, we'll have a chance to hear from the working groups on this matter. We need concrete measures to strengthen the industrial and technological base of the defense of the Union. We have to consider the opportunities coming from the academic world and from SMEs, and we have to create synergies in connection with dual-purpose technologies. And we also have to support and promote common research and technology projects. We have to bear in mind the opportunities that are offered by the Horizon 2020 European Programme. The Chamber Defence Committee that I'm honoured to chair, together with the Industry Committee, is analysing the communication of the European Commission in connection with a more competitive defence and security system, and we are sending a final document to the institutions. In that document, we are underscoring some of the points that were raised in the European Council meeting of last December. And in June of 2014, it was possible to develop these issues even further, and they have been further defined, and concrete actions have been identified. The European Defence Agency is also going to establish ad hoc centres in order to discuss these issues, and the interests of member states have to be represented, but we also have to consider the needs of other actors who are cooperating in this field. So how can we ensure continuity in the activities of the Commission? How can we create a bridge with the June 2015 European Council meeting? How can we have the necessary coordination with national parliaments and national governments and civil society? These are important questions, and we have to try to find some answers. The link between the two plans and the bridge that I was referring to, therefore, may be the role of the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, who is also the Vice President of the European Commission and who is responsible for external relations as well. And the Council should be able to discuss matters on common foreign and security policy and make proposals to the Council. The High Representative is also the head of the European Defence Agency, and this is also why we think we should strengthen the role of our conference with that of the High Representative, to strengthen the link. Now, these are no longer distinct matters because the borders, in fact, are blurred. We cannot consider these matters as being separate from one another, and therefore the High Representative should establish the strong link with regard to cooperation with strategic partners. We need to understand the concept of strategic partnership. We're no longer talking about allies here. We have to broaden this concept, even in regional terms. Transatlantic partnership is a cornerstone of the common security and defence policy of the Union, and a dialogue on the respective roles and goals of NATO and the European Union should be stimulated and should be better calibrated in light of the recent changes in geopolitical balance in the conflict areas. When we talk about strategic partners, we've got to consider some European nations. Some of them are candidates of the European Union and others aren't. Some of them are members of NATO and some aren't. Often they border with European countries, and we need to have a steady dialogue with these nations. The European Union should be more and more credible within this dialogue, and that will be possible only if we can do away with uncertainties. We have to speak with one single voice. There are some differences in the national policies, and this has to be seen as a strength, as a richness. And in order to pursue this goal, problems and emergencies that are felt more strongly in bordering countries have to be seen as emergencies by all the EU member states, and they all have to contribute to pursuing one goal: internal security and external security. And we have to be able to maintain a democratic society and economic prosperity. And this, of course, is going to require territorial integrity, safety of all our peoples, the protection of critical infrastructure, the monitoring of these infrastructure along borders and maritime routes that are essential for international trade. We have to support trade. We have to make sure we have stable and secure energy supplies. We have to protect our scientific, technological, and industrial heritage. And therefore, we need to reflect together. We need to see what risks there are, what the perils are, and how they can change over time. We know that we have to see this from a military perspective and non-military, within our borders and without. Threats coming from states and so-called non-states. We have to protect our national interests, and this has to be seen as a collective operation within the multilateral frameworks that we all belong to. Therefore, we are required to participate and to show mutual solidarity. Of course, when we talk about protecting national interests and union interests, our actions cannot only be based on the use of armed forces. Military action should be integrated with the political action, diplomacy, economic measures, cultural programs, cooperation, intelligence. This should all be done in a holistic and integrated approach. And I'm sure that in the course of our debate, we will have many opportunities to continue our deliberation on these important issues, which we need to gain further insight on. I wish now to conclude my remarks by saying what my other colleagues said this morning. I wish to thank all the delegations for showing their support and their solidarity to our country in connection with the two Marines who have been detained for about 1,000 days while acting in the interest of the countries of the Union. And now, dear colleagues, I will give the floor over to the Undersecretary of Defense of the Italian Republic, Mr. Domenico Rossi, and I thank you very much for participating in our session. The floor is yours, Mr. Undersecretary.
Thank you, Honourable Chairman, Honourable members of parliaments of member states. It is a real honour for me to speak before such a highly qualified gathering on such an important topic, such as prospects of European defence. And I would like to start by making reference to the conclusions of the 2013 Council, which indicates that heads of state and government intend to once again address the topic of defence in June 2015. And on that occasion, and I quote, the European Council will assess concrete progress on all issues and provide further guidance on the basis of a report from the Council, drawing on inputs from the Commission, the High Representative, and the European Defence Agency. It is clear, therefore, that lively debate is taking place so as to focus once again on security and defence in the political debate. And this obviously requires that the European Union strategy be reviewed, looking at its multidimensional approach and strategic partnerships, namely those with NATO and the United Nations. Europe, as a global player, is relatively young, and yet threats, methodologies, aims, and strategic action instruments were identified already back in December 2003, when the first European strategic document outlined all of the fundamental aspects of the Union's foreign policy, i.e., 10 years before our last council meeting. Since then, a lot has changed. The Lisbon Treaty has come into force. The European External Action Service was established. The scenario in terms of security, even in our neighbouring region, has worsened, and many instruments have been fine-tuned, but the European Union's ambition has remained unchanged since 2003 as a union of 25 states with over 450 million people, producing a quarter of the world's gross national product, and with a wide range of instruments at its disposal. The European Union is inevitably a global player, and it is even more so 11 years later. I would like to now illustrate the last point, i.e. the availability of a wide range of instruments. Are these to be just non-coercive means? Can the European Union only be considered as wielding soft power? I think that first and foremost, we need to recognize that if the synergic deployment of political, diplomatic, and economic instruments does take place, it can indeed be a very significant way of influencing the course of events. However, in order to complete the range of instruments at the EU's disposal, we believe that hard powers are necessary, even though we're aware that they can lead to serious consequences. This, in my view, is the revolutionary aspect of the European Union's so-called multidimensional approach, the way of confirming, ratifying on the part of all member states the credibility of the EU, which is based on the concrete possibility of deploying and employing a range of instruments, from diplomatic and social instruments to coercion. And to prove this, we can look back at a number of EU operations and missions, financial instruments, diplomatic delegations, political contacts, and meetings at all levels. This is why at the December 2013 Council, heads of state and government felt the need to stress firmly that defence matters. Our leaders have asked the European Union and member states to take on more responsibilities in the face of the challenges coming from a rapidly evolving geopolitical environment. And in order to achieve this, they indicated that means and investments must be made available, whereas in the past this was not possible due to a cut in defence spending and a fragmented defence market. Only shortly thereafter, the security framework for Europe and the transatlantic community changed radically. Conflict has erupted in neighboring regions in a more frequent, intense and complex fashion. And this means that the commitments made in December are even more important. But I would like to stress another important aspect. At the same council meeting, and I quote, it was stressed that the Union undertakes to work in close partnership with its global, transatlantic and regional partners. And this cooperation should be further enhanced in a spirit of mutual strengthening and complementarity. In other words, our leaders in requesting that the issue of security and defence be at the core of the international debate, underscored the need to ensure that there is comprehensive consistency across the board, so as to ensure that global players, act in unison with their partnerships with the United Nations, international organizations, regional organizations, and third parties. There is no doubt that the complexity of the various crises has indicated the need to develop a multidimensional approach that must be coordinated and involve the entire international community, particularly given the need to face terrorism and transnational organized crime, as exemplified in the challenges stemming from ISIS. Current crises, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Mali, Central African Republic, and Somalia, indicate that there is a growing need for consistency and interoperability among all of the key players, and it is only if we enhance our strategic partnership that we can guarantee peace and security. In this context, when we discuss defence and the relevant funding and assets, cooperation between the European Union and the United Nations becomes even more important, given that all over the world, peacekeeping operations have become increasingly complex in a growing number of scenarios, despite the limited resources and funding. Member states have at their disposal individual sets of assets and forces that can be made available for all the organizations that they are members of. The current challenges need more rapid deployment capability so as to respond rapidly to sudden crises. It is necessary also to update the technologies that can be deployed in the field. And in addition to this, it is essential to guarantee adequate training and equipment for all those who work in peace building and peacekeeping operations. In that respect, the EU can be an essential player in order to enhance cooperation and interoperability with civilian and military personnel from different nations. Ultimately, this enhanced cooperation could lead to a more equitable distribution of the various burdens that we have to take on, and in many cases this can guarantee so-called local ownership in the various countries in which we operate. The crises that we need to bear in mind are, for instance, the recent experience in Central African Republic, where the EUFOR CAR mission is a good example of EU-UN cooperation. This is a mission that the Council has decided to renew recently for an additional 3 months in order to fill a potentially dangerous vacuum while we await the handover to the multidimensional integrated stabilization mission in the Central African Republic, which will occur in March 2015. discussions are taking place at an institutional level in Europe so as to implement a sort of coalition of the willing, which envisages an EU mission or operation, the implementation of which would be entrusted to one or more member states pursuant to Article 44 of the European Union Treaty, which in the future could be applied along the lines of flexibility approach so as to strengthen complementarity and cooperation between the EU and the UN. I'm confident that the comprehensive review for peace operations in 2015 announced by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will represent a unique opportunity for us to examine the current role of peace operations and identify the shortcomings and learn lessons and be guided by best practices. I would like to now move on to another strategic cooperation, which I think is extremely important, as indicated by our leaders in December 2013, and I'm referring to the mutual enhancement and complementarity with NATO within the framework of strategic collaboration agreements between the EU and NATO. Together with the European Union's External Action Service, NATO continues to represent transatlantic framework for collective defense and essential forum for consultations and decisions on security involving all the allies so as to pursue the three main tasks identified in NATO's strategic concept, i.e. collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. Now, more than ever, we must be capable of combining the range of instruments available to the EU with the capabilities that NATO has in the area of defense and security matters. The EU and NATO are natural strategic partners, not only because they have 22 member states in common, but because they promote the same values and the same principles. If we consider the nature of the evolution in the cooperation between these two organizations in recent years, it is clear that this has been significantly enhanced whilst remaining within the framework of the agreements in force. Both these organizations are doing their utmost within the limits that are provided for by their respective political authorities, even though some believe that formal cooperation should be significantly improved. We should not underestimate the practical and informal cooperation which takes place on a daily basis to the benefit of both organizations. The participation in their respective summits, councils, and regular exchanges on the part of NATO and EU ensures that there is a constant exchange on areas of mutual interest, and systematic interaction occurs between staff members of the two organizations, and these are just examples of how practical action can evolve our partnership. An aspect of particular importance in cooperation initiatives involving these two organizations is the development of capabilities. The concept of smart defense developed by NATO and pooling and sharing developed by the EU represent, in a manner of speaking, different labels that essentially identify the same objective to support the development of capabilities and interoperability with a view to avoiding duplications and ensuring a more cost-effective approach. The European Union and NATO share a number of common interests in the development of defense capabilities as an essential prerequisite in order to attain their respective objectives. The fact that the EU-NATO summits between 2013 and 2016 will be taking place at the same time indicates the interest in developing both formal and informal cooperation with respect to practical action to the two partners' mutual benefit. Even though the key objectives of these organizations are different, we're talking about collective defense planning within NATO and a common security and defense policy within the EU. We know that there is common terminology, timing is more synchronized, and these organizations have together identified a complementary list of capability shortfalls, such as remote controlled aircraft, in-flight refueling, satellite communications, and cyber defense, which are the ultimate natural outcome of this long journey. Both these processes are characterized by the same principle: a single set of forces available to the member states of the European Union and countries that are allies of NATO. The positive dynamics of practical cooperation and staff-to-staff interaction will continue to play a fundamental role in consolidating closer ties between the EU and NATO. Coordination continues to be of the essence in order to avoid interferences in the development of cooperative or multinational projects and guarantee their mutual enhancement. However, this cooperation between these partners must continue to evolve. Indeed, there are a number of areas of common interest that must be further expanded, especially in the light of the preparations for the 2015 Council and the implementation of the decisions of the NATO summit in Wales. There are various conceptual aspects, such as so-called hybrid warfare, which was implemented in Ukraine so as to exert influential regional power. We are also witnessing the simultaneous use of the full range of both conventional and non-conventional system, including the exploitation of ethnic or linguistic minorities, ranging from the massive use of propaganda to cyber attacks. The European Union and NATO must be prepared to effectively face these threats, improving their readiness and enhancing their respective capabilities to counter these attacks. Naturally, NATO and the European Union must continue to work side by side, as has been the case in Kosovo, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and offshore along the coast, of Somalia. Transatlantic cooperation based on common values and based on our strengths is of fundamental importance for Europe now more than ever. In this connection, I would like to point out that it is extremely encouraging and promising that one of the first meetings that High Representative Federica Mogherini had last Tuesday was with the Secretary General of NATO. I'm therefore confident that these relations will continue to be developed. And I would like to conclude by stressing what, in my view, is one of the first examples of cooperation in Bosnia-Herzegovina. An EU-guided police mission took over from the UN International Police Task Force, whereas on the ground the S4 NATO operation continued. Subsequently, the European Union took over the military part of the international community's commitment with the EUFOR Althea operation in Bosnia-Herzegovina just after the end of the EUFOR Concordia operation. operation which took place in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The urgency of proceeding with this handover in the Balkans was the reason why longer-lasting agreements with a wider scope were agreed on, the so-called Berlin Plus process, and an EU special representative was also high representative for the implementation of the Dayton Peace Accords, hence ensuring full synergy among the different global stakeholders and players at a political level. I believe that this example testifies to the commitment to cooperate on the part of all the different players and the use of multidimensional instruments. In short, cooperation is possible and the full range of instruments is necessary. So let us pursue this goal, continuing to work for a safer Europe in a better world, a Europe which, as was said this morning, can no longer delegate its security to others. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Onorevole Sottosegretario.
Thank you very much to the Undersecretary for these remarks. My dear colleagues, I think we can begin our debate. You know that at 4:30 we should begin the next session, and we will have an address delivered by the High Representative, Mrs. Federica Mogherini. Since we have quite a large number of requests for the floor, you shall each have 3 minutes for your remarks. Let us begin with Sir William Cash from the United Kingdom.
We've only just this minute received the conclusions, which have a very considerable bearing on this debate, because this morning we were given another version which talked about the proposals for a defence commissioner and a whole range of matters which I can say categorically would be unacceptable to the United Kingdom. I reply therefore vicariously to Elmar Brok, who I imagine had something to do with this, but on the other hand he may not have done, so I won't say anything disrespectful. The question is, however, just exactly where do we stand in relation to all these defence questions, because ultimately this is about the issue of whose blood will be spilt, who will actually fight, where is the money going to come from, what is the relationship between Article 5 to protect the smaller states as well as everybody else in NATO. What is the position with regard to Article 3 of the Treaty of 1990, in which Germany was restricted with respect to the question of the control and manufacture of nuclear weapons? There is also the question of whether the new voting arrangements, which came into effect on the 1st of November, would have a bearing on all this, whereby, for example, Germany, France, and one or two small countries have a blocking minority subject to the Iona Compromise, but also the trajectory of all this and where is it taking us to. Then there's the question of, in the context of there being no growth in Europe and Europe becoming increasingly unstable, who will pay? Where is the money going to come from? How much do the voters actually want the arrangements that are being proposed? Is there going to be a battle group? And if so, what decisions are going to be taken, yes or no? The fact is that we should stick with NATO. NATO, and I may say the American elections a couple of days ago may have a bearing on this. We know in the United Kingdom about war. We know that we wanted, after the war, to have a peaceful solution. In an unstable Europe, with protests and riots and high unemployment and instability and low growth, the idea of integrating ourselves in any sensible, or rather in any realistic manner with the European Union is really just not possible. I'm sorry to have to put it this way, but the reality is that we want to cooperate, but we cannot have European government. That's why I say no to more political integration and no to a European Union along the lines that have been proposed.
Grazie.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Mr. Bogdan Klich from the Polish delegation.
Thank you, Chairman. The EU still falls far short of its security and defense potential. We are aware of that CSDP missions and operations have shown that while the EU can deal politically and militarily with small-scale crises, there are still a number of capability shortfalls. The CSDP should therefore increase Europe's ability to act, notably by allowing more planning and delivery of capabilities and better civil-military coordination. We now need to agree on the way forward. It means that we don't need new institutions, but we require a strong show of political will to give a new impulse to the CSDP. Moreover, we need a new shape of relationship with our neighbors, mainly with Ukraine and Russia. It will be this year to decide about the future of the relationship between the Russian Federation on one hand and the West on the other one, and about the strategic multi-annual perspective for these relations. From the Central European point of view, we have to redefine those relations. Furthermore, in the current situation, the privileged special partnership between the EU and Russia seems to be outdated. There is a need for a significant change in the policy towards the Russian Federation. Frankly speaking, a new attitude of protecting our partners in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus against the restoration of Moscow's domination after the majority of post-Soviet countries should be worked out. Finally, with regard to the new Russian approach to the West, the question is how to strengthen our cooperation with Ukraine, how to support Kyiv in the situation of Russian military invasion that Ukraine is facing now and will be facing in future, how to show to the Ukrainians that they are not alone or doomed to failure. This means, in the long-term perspective, that the EU has to be actively engaged in that transition of that state, economy and security system, and support this transition financially and, of course, politically. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Monsieur Arnaud Danjean from the European Parliament. Mr. Chairman, the European defense policy issues today aren't so much to strengthen the partnership, but to ensure the engagement of the European member states. Because unless our countries are engaged in European defense, it will be difficult to have external cooperation. I mean, external cooperation is a good idea, but it cannot be a replacement for the direct engagement of European nations. Let me give you an example of what is happening in military terms. Today, the European Union is engaged in 5 military operations, not civil operations, but military operations. And of the 5, most are taking place with less than 10 member states. 2 of them have 3rd countries involved. One, EUFOR in Bosnia, has a troop from a country, has troops from a non-European country. So clearly, we know that it is important to have external cooperation. However, member states themselves need to be engaged. They need to provide the necessary support for these missions. Secondly, strategic partnerships. We use this word widely, and we see it in all European Union documents. All the countries around us are considered to be strategic partners. I think we need to prioritize. We need to reconsider this, and we need to have a clear definition of what we mean by defense-related strategic partnership. There has been disappointment with Russia, and Russia is not the only partner that we might have some disappointments with. Now, we have 3 strategic partnerships that we think are a priority in military terms. We have the UN, because from a military standpoint, we participate with the UN. We have the European mission in Africa, and we know that it will be followed by UN mission. So we have to work in close cooperation. And our second strategic partnership is with the African Union. And in fact, here we finance, we don't participate directly, but we fund many of the European Union operations. And particularly, I'm thinking of what is happening in Somalia. And the third partner is clearly NATO. We spoke about this, Mr. Chairman, and I think that there are many concrete examples on the ground that seem to be successful, yet we need political and strategic deliberation on our cooperation with NATO. And sorry, the sound was cut. Thank you, and I give the floor now to Germany, Mr. Hans-Peter Bartels.
Chairman, colleagues, for a year now, Europe has been surrounded by crises more than ever before. And at the same time, European security and defense policy has become strengthened. But has it become better? Well, I believe not, no. CSDP is still very much in the infant status that it started out as after Lisbon. It has not developed in the way it could have done. European defense is not visible. At the same time, the 28 EU member states have a total of 1.5 million troops taken together. We spend 190 million euros on defense. Is that not enough money? Are those too few troops? Should we begin by discussing defense budgets, or would it be better to speak about effectiveness? I think it's effectiveness that we should speak about. And we should not try to evade the issue by saying that, well, defense, it's NATO that is responsible. And by that we mean the United States. But no, the United States are not focusing exclusively on European security these days. On the contrary, they also have responsibilities in the Asia-Pacific area, challenges which are not primarily European challenges. They may be ultimately, but that is a key challenge for the US right now. In other words, Europe will have to take more responsibility for itself with European troops. And then we are told time and again that, well, since there is NATO, we should avoid duplication. So Europe and NATO shouldn't duplicate capabilities because actually NATO already has everything. That's what people often say. NATO has a headquarters in Europe. The US have a headquarters in Europe, US EUCOM in Stuttgart, Germany. Europe has no headquarters in Europe. At the same time, we expect ourselves to become more efficient. However, this will require institutions, not just political will, but also institutions. Institutions are important. So let us make this conference into a starting point here to become more institutional in European security and defense policy. This will not require new treaties. It is merely about implementing the Lisbon Treaty, because here nothing has happened since Lisbon. The treaty says what we are supposed to do, but we're not doing it. So let us dismantle duplications in 28 European armed forces by becoming more efficient as one European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I give now the floor to Mr. Kamenos from the Greek delegation. Thank you, Chairman. Dear colleagues, in 22 years in the Parliament, we voted on hundreds of decisions on European defence. And the issue is, does European defence exist? Or is it just a question of signing and voting on conclusions? It doesn't exist. We don't have a European defence. And since we don't have a European defence, we'll never be able to have a European energy policy. We'll never be able to have a European economic zone, which is protected by European defence. we cannot even have European borders if we don't have European defense. Now, we need to face up to reality. And the truth is that, well, we have in Greece people who come from the east, from islands. And do you know what happens every day to these citizens, to these people? We have aircraft flying 300 meters above their homes. And in the sea, we have the European Navy, the French Navy, the German Navy, the Italian Navy that does not react to any of this. So how can we tell these citizens that they are being protected by European defense? What about our friends in Cyprus? Cyprus is a member state of the European Union. They are not being recognized. While we are here today, what is happening in Cyprus? There is a vessel that is being followed by 4 Turkish warships. In this same sea, we have vessels that are not reacting, F-260s that are not reacting. So we are facing the second Cold War. I think that we have to acknowledge this. And we supported a dictatorship in Ukraine, and we have to see what is going to be done by the European Union in terms of defense. In connection with the Islamic terrorists, they're not only going to act in Syria, but they're already in Crimea, and the microphone has been turned off.
Grazie. Ascoltiamo adesso.
Thank you, and we'll now have the European Parliament, Mr. Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Chair. CSDP summit in Brussels in December 2013 was a good opportunity to have a strategic evaluation. The summit can be summed up in 2 words: defense matters. CSDP has been operational in a number of areas successfully. We should praise activities in the field of CSDP up to now and need to know where the lessons need to be learned. One thing we need to be clear: who are our strategic partners? Paradox is Russia was our strategic partner. On the other hand, naturally, we should consider NATO as a strategic partner. During the last NATO summit in Wales, EU was mentioned the highest number of times. 23 out of 29 countries are both EU and NATO members. We also have to define which are the key areas and having in mind the competency of the EU. We can successfully cooperate in cyberspace, maritime security. As well, we can increase the synergies in the areas of freedom, security, and justice, tackling topics like migration, organized crime, terrorism. Other areas of cooperation could be border management, energy security. In terms of military capabilities, we should look further for working together with NATO, solving crises and improving EU initiatives in the CSDP. We do not choose where the next crisis will come from. Therefore, we have to be able to adopt and construct new partnerships to deal with the new crisis. Finally, I want to appreciate the Dutch initiatives on the new battle groups. It is important and constructive. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Mr. Joachim Pueyo from the French delegation. Thank you. I wish to say something about the relations between the EU and NATO. NATO continues to be an important player because it means international solidarity. As with the United Nations, this is an organization that has to have a very special role, in particular after the end of the Afghanistan conflict, where it was a major player. And the fact that the United States are refocusing their strategic priorities in the Asia-Pacific zone is also an issue and a challenge for the organization. So close cooperation exists, but it has to be strengthened with the European Union so as to avoid that the two organizations might encroach upon one another. Now, some are wondering whether the European Union should be an instrument of soft power, of diplomacy, or whether it should be able to react directly to crisis by intervening with its armed forces on the ground. The European Union, I think, should be a major player in both these areas. I think that the view whereby NATO should be hard power and the EU should mean soft power is restrictive, and I think that it harms the important role that the European Union should be playing in both these areas. I think that European defense is complementary with NATO, and we need, however, to strengthen capability development. We need capability building. We need to strengthen the defense, and we need to do this by restructuring the defense industry and by supporting research and development. I think we also need to increase the effectiveness, the visibility, and the impact of common security and defense policy of Europe. And this would mean being able to face up to new challenges, to identify those, to identify the threats that the EU has to react to, and we have to prioritize our strategic objectives. We need a global approach when it comes to conflict prevention and crisis management, and I think it is essential, considering a proliferation of entities that deal with these matters. I think that we have to make sure that we don't harm the visibility and the effectiveness of this approach. And I have a question. Some states view European security in a certain way. We shouldn't lose sight of the efforts made by some states in terms of funding the capabilities. We have to be able to strengthen these capabilities. Thank you. Thank you. And we now have Madame Sabine Losing from the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. There seems to be the view here, shared by many, that we are not a serious global player if we are not willing to accept military means of solving conflicts. I find this a worrying tendency. If whenever there is a conflict, it seems to become commonplace to call for seemingly simple military solutions. However, the Western policy of intervention is a key part of the problem. It is not part of the solution. And furthermore, and this has been said a number of times here today, the catastrophic operations in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Libya should have taught us a lesson, or rather the result of these missions. Nonetheless, we will continue spending exorbitant sums of money into a European infrastructure, and there are calls for spending more and more. This funding is being called for in order to enable these military interventions. However, I believe we don't need more of them. On the contrary, we need a fundamental reversal. What we need is refusing future military interventions. We need massive disarmament and a significant reduction in military budgets. The funds thus made available should be spent immediately for sensible measures for reducing poverty, because, and this is a proven fact, poverty is the main cause leading to conflicts. According to the World Bank, $50 billion would be necessary, and no more than that, in order to implement the Millennium Development Goals. And one of these goals is cutting poverty by half. This would be just a small part of annual defense spending. And making this money, these funds available through disarmament measures, that would be one of the most important and effective measures that the European Union could take in order to contribute to peace in the world. However, we are currently discussing, quite openly discussing, using military spending as development aid. This takes funds away from fighting poverty. If the European Union wants to be respected and not feared as a global actor, then this policy should be reversed, and the fight against poverty should be put at the very center of European foreign policy. And this should be complemented by a disarmament debate, which unfortunately and regrettably has not taken place yet, not here today either. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. And now over to Jose Maria Chiquilla Barba, Spain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. More than 4 years ago, the 10th and 11th of June of 2010, in Kampala, Uganda, we adopted the amendments to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. That's more than 4 years ago. The state of ratification and implementation of the Kampala amendments on war crimes and were ratified by Liechtenstein more than 2 years ago on the 2nd of May of 2012. And today I've heard of many people speak of conflicts, wars, aggressions that are very close to the European territory. But what is true is that up until today, November 2014, 16 countries, more than 16 countries of the European Union have yet not ratified or implemented a legal instrument as important as this one for these things that concern us: wars, war crimes, aggressions. 12 countries of the European Union have not ratified. But not only that, they've turned their back to a recent resolution from 2014 of the European Parliament, Resolution 2724, which called upon the European Union to adopt a common position on the Kampala amendments, calling upon the members of the Union to ratify and implement those amendments, as well as to support their implementation. And the European Union was also asked to include those amendments in their external actions through the provision of technical assistance. That's what we have. That's what we have, and therefore very much concerned that all these conflicts, these aggressions that we've been mentioning all day today, I think the time has come for that legal instrument that would give us strength so that in 2015, 30 countries will have ratified that, while the common position of the European Union should go along those lines. So my question and my concern, what bothers me, is if we are not capable in that common policy of implementing an international treaty that would give us strength to European countries, to democratic countries that fulfill, that are peaceful in the international circles, how we'll be able to agree on issues and things such as those that we've discussed today that are so complex and so sensitive. For example, European defense, the role of the European Union in NATO and in near conflicts. Let's start with the legal instrument, and then afterwards we can act. Thank you.
Grazie. Ascoltiamo.
Thank you, and over to Mario Borghezio, European Parliament. Thank you very much, Chairman. Not too far from here, where people would like to see Black Guys' flags fly on St. Peter's, in Kikla, near the Tunisian border, and around Benghazi, Hajj al-Sharia's militia are attempting to establish using military force, that caliphate, which was the focus of Chairman Casini's concerned remarks. And I thank him for this, because I think it was high time for a European meeting on the subject of defense to address the serious threat coming from the caliphate. I would like to point out that we must not forget the plight of our 2 Marines, and we must say this whenever we have the chance to have an exchange with our European partners, because they were fighting a war on piracy. They were protecting our dignity and security in the name of the rule of law. So we must always honor and defend these 2 heroes of ours, especially when we're before our foreign friends, and we must never forget them on official occasions. Thank you very much, Mr. Borghezio. The presidency, as you see, is wearing a visible sign to mark its support and solidarity for these 2 Marines, and the conference will renew its support and sympathy. And now over to Marius Lucian Breyer, Romania.
Dear colleagues, as regards the Eastern EU flank, we agree that entering in a new period of geopolitical change, which started with the annexation of the Crimea by Russia in April 2014, the EU would need to reshape its security and defense policy mechanism. Thus, it could rebuild its soft power instrument in order to be able to effectively challenge the Russian hard power tactics in the Eastern Partnership region. Otherwise, the EU will have to manage with a continuous risk to its security, taking also into account of the revival of the frozen conflicts of this region. This concurrency should be avoided by putting in common of our capacity through credible common projects on an efficient industrial and technological basis. In that sense, a strong transatlantic partnership built on common values and interests should represent a key solution for the European security. At present, the role of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the reshaping the EU's security instruments and policies towards Russia is vital because it's the deterrent role against Kremlin. Ukraine is a dossier upon which we have to work together in the direction of a strengthened interconnection between the EU and NATO's different military and security mechanisms, taking into account that the September NATO summit rejected a military intervention, increasing the military budget. Going this way, it's will possible to create a new system of European defense and to build a strong mechanism of collective defense in Europe. As regards the achieving of a European defense, my country is supporting the development of its capacity, aiming and setting up a strong industrial and technological basis under the pooling and sharing initiative. Romania asked and has been committed to participating at several cooperation projects focusing the capacities development as European Unit for Satellite Communication Service Purchase, Aerial Strategic Transport and European Cyber Defense, focusing on EU infrastructure protection and personal training. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Grazie.
Thank you. And now over to Anna Angelin Elsing, Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to come back to the words of Mr. Elmar Brok, who's standing there and maybe listening. Mr. Brok said this morning, Mr. Brok? Mr. Brok? Yeah, Mr. Brok. I would like to repeat your words this morning because you clearly stated that European defense cooperation is very important and that political will is important. And political will is actually the only thing that we share and there is in common. And I would like to underline the words of Mr. Hans-Peter Bartels, because he already mentioned the defense cooperation And I would like to underline the cooperation from the Dutch with the Belgians for years already, with the Germans for some years already. Actually, last June, we started with the Air Mobile Brigade to integrate it within your Division Schnelle Kräfte. And that's, for the Dutch delegation, for our parliament, actually the way forward, because we all know that there are huge austerity measures. We all know that there are huge shortfalls with our capabilities. And I would like to call upon and actually underline what Mr. Rossi already mentioned. We should also discuss Directive 81. We should discuss Article 346, because if you really want serious work closely together on our capabilities and our shortfalls, we have to put it on the table. We should also discuss more, actually emphasize all the procedures in parliaments. And I was happy actually with the recommendations of our colleague from Ireland, who was at least clear about working closely together within the European Army. But you also mentioned you would like to work together with the capabilities who are right there, like the EU battle groups. So let's see, in Riga, I would like to call upon our colleague from Riga to put this all on the table and to make it work and to see what we can do, because during Greece debates we discussed EU battle groups, use them or lose them, and I think the next step is just make it work. Thank you.
Grazie a lei.
Thank you very much. And now over to Anna Maria Gomez, European Parliament.
I'd like to answer the questions raised by our British colleagues. Where does the money come? The money comes from our taxpayers, and it's been badly spent. And we need to spend it better, more rationally. And the only way to do it, and not to continue losing capacities that we have been losing with this crisis, we need to indeed work smartly in Europe, and that does not conflict. It actually strengthens our capacities as well in the framework of NATO or the UN or in the other capacities where we need to work together. The kind of threats we are confronted need a European answer, collective answer. Sometimes we may act in NATO, sometimes our partners in NATO don't want and are not prepared to work in it. They clearly said to us in Libya that it was our baby. We are very much responsible for the way things went in Libya. It was totally stupid to think that we could deal with border security in Libya without dealing with central command security, as if indeed the militia could deliver security, as if they were not going to be infiltrated by armed criminality and terrorism as they are, and if indeed we would be able to deliver any kind of security without having basic SSR and DDR, and only us could have done it. And we haven't done it because some member states prefer to continue to do business as usual, like in the case of Gaddafi. I'm sure we will talk more about that tomorrow. But now I want to look at other crises we are confronted, where indeed we need to act European. Think of Ebola. Why are some member states indeed spending taxpayers' money and not really being very effective? And this is a crisis that, by the way, could actually be even weaponized. Isn't it the Spanish government who has been picking up that? Don't we actually need to work together in a coordinated way with a proper CSDP operation? Think of ISIS. We're not doing what we should do in terms of even sharing intelligence and even I mean, the supplies of weapons. Our ambassador in Baghdad the other day said that nobody controls in which hands they end up with. We need indeed proper coordination at the European level, even if that is also part of a coordination with other partners, namely in the framework of NATO, of the UN. And think of Ukraine. I mean, this increase of flights and what it means. Also the cyber attacks. Our critical infrastructure, be it in the air, be it in land, be it in maritime, is very much dependent, is very much central to our way of life. And we are not nearly prepared, not putting the money at the European level, because no country alone can actually face the kind of responsibilities we are confronted with.
Grazie.
Thank you. And now over to the Belgian delegate, Stéphane Krusniara. Thank you very much, Chairman. National defence represents an important part of Belgium's international policies and also of the European Union. The issue of sovereignty is obviously essential and is linked to the issue of pooling of resources. But defence, such as all public action activities, must evolve with taking into account changing times. And we see this in the euro area, for instance. Before a common currency, national currencies represented states in a very symbolic way. Now, this is no longer the case. The euro responds to a need that is in line with the times, that of an irreversible and continuous integration between countries. And the euro has enabled countries such as Belgium to be treated on equal footing and to be involved in decision-making. So our vision is not that of complete merger of respective armies. We have to see things looking at the big picture. We have to consider the need to develop a European governance system, also including defence. We live in a time which is characterized by an increasingly global world in which geopolitical challenges and keeping the peace are things that no single individual member state can tackle alone. So we have to have a more comprehensive vision before it is too late. We have to therefore continue to work on a reinforced, enhanced partnership, working on synergies at a moment in which our national armies are at a turning point due to geopolitical, historical or budgetary considerations. The principles of diplomacy is that of the lone rider, and this was true in the past. This is no longer relevant. We think that a military power, if it is pooled, does not mean surrendering sovereignty. This is a form of synergy and complementarity to be more effective at a European level, continuing what our armies are already doing in the form of various cooperation arrangements. And we have to also consider what is envisaged in the Lisbon Treaty. We have to act in a consistent fashion, but at the same time, we have to have convergence in terms of synergy between the military and civilian sector, strategic deployment, and military personnel training. Thank you very much. And now over to Konstantinos Tsiaras, Greece. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The December 2013 European Council noted the role that the European Union, through CSDP and other instruments, has to play in preventing and managing conflicts and their causes. The European Union needs to assume a more proactive role as a security provider, especially in dealing with crises in our region. The concepts of comprehensive approach, synergies, enhanced cooperation and coordination with our strategic partners need to be fully implemented in the case of the extraordinary ISIS threat. A number of EU member states are already taking part in the international coalition against ISIS. Greece participates in the alliance through the provision of humanitarian aid and at a military level by sending ammunition to the Kurdish forces combating ISIL in Iraq. But the European Union, in the context of the common security and defense policy, should activate its capabilities in a coordinated way. A short question, do you see such a potential perhaps in the field of training where there is already sufficient experience? Thank you.
Grazie a lei. Colleghi.
Thank you, dear colleagues. This brings us to an end of the list of delegates who have asked for the floor, and I would like to now invite Domenico Rossi, representing the Italian government, to speak with his customary brevity. Over to Italian Defence Undersecretary Domenico Rossi. I don't believe that there's any need for an answer on my part, given my opening statements, because the various delegates have expanded upon the concepts that were the focus of my address. What I believe can be observed is lack of trust in our ability to change the status quo and our ability to attain our objectives. So allow me to tell you a personal story. Before being appointed Defense Undersecretary, I was an officer in the Italian army, and I became deputy commander of the Italian army. My military career began in 1974, and my first task was 50 kilometers from the Italian border in a tank battalion. In my first week in service, I was brought close to the border, and I was told where the enemy would have attacked from. And I was also told that the mean survival time of my unit had been estimated between 1 and 2 hours. If at that point in 1974 somebody had told me that 20 years later I would have found myself sitting at a table with the friends from Poland, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, I would have told them that they were raving lunatics, and that was not a likely occurrence at all. Now, bearing in mind this anecdote, I think we can say that nothing is impossible. No objective is unattainable. The important thing is believing that we can do it. And so going back to our debate, I think that we're all fully aware of the fact that Europe can only be a global player on account of its history, on account of its traditions, its culture, and above all, on account of its ability to become united, overcoming differences in the name of democratic values such as peace, freedom, social equity, and human solidarity. So Europe can only be a global player, and consequently, it must also take on some very clear commitments in the field of defense. And we have clearly stated that defense is an important element for any country's development and consequently for Europe's development. There can be no development in the absence of security. So if security, as we have all said, is important, if security matters to us, then we need to be able to implement European defense. And the question then is how to go about this. Some have asked about available resources. The resources can be found in our current budget. And I would like to refer to something that was said by one of the participants. We have to spend our resources better. Let's not forget that over the past 10, 15 years, the armed forces of many countries have shrunk on account of more limited budgets. But we don't know if in these countries capabilities have been reduced to such an extent that now there is a shortfall, or whether there is still redundancy that in available resources that can be eliminated. So we must work on the basis of available resources and identify the fundamental assets, starting with battle groups, which are obviously the beginning of not just a theoretical form of cooperation, but a more pragmatic form of cooperation. And on behalf of the Italian government, I certainly welcome your reference to training, which must be increasingly European, not only because that way people can understand procedures better, but also because we can have a better understanding, a mutual understanding, and I'm talking about the men and women involved in our respective countries. So I don't think that individual countries are jeopardizing their sovereignty. I think each country should take half a step back with respect to their sovereignty in order to ensure that Europe can have a stronger potential, an enhanced potential. And Europe has a leading role to play in defense, security, and development for all of our member states. Thank you. Thank you, Under Secretary, for your passionate delivery. And I think that at this point we can consider that our debate has highlighted the importance of common security and defence policy within the EU, not just to guarantee peace and security within the European Union and within each individual member country, but also because in so doing the European Union can effectively implement an active policy and contribute in a concrete fashion to the pursuit of peace, security, democracy, and freedom in the whole world. I would like to thank all of the delegates who have taken the floor and all the participants, and I would like to inform you that High Representative Federica Mogherini will be joining us in a few more minutes, which goes to say that there is the opportunity for us to take a short coffee break. And I believe coffee is always a pleasant experience in Rome and in Italy. So thank you very much.